Right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this Resist launch. We are going to present our second set of findings at this launch. Resist is a 5-year project funded under the EU's Feminism and Democracy Call. It aims to address what has been termed anti-gender through understanding and mapping these mobilisations across Europe, which was our first phase, and our findings can be found on our website. And today we are going to present findings from our second phase of research. And we're very, very excited to show you what we found and to hopefully work with those of you in the room who are interested in thinking about how we might create positive social change. Just to note that this presentation will be in English, but we do have resources on our website across multiple languages. Please do use the captions that can be found at the bottom of the screen. So just to go through what to expect today, we will just, as you've heard, have a brief introduction. I'll be passing you over to Maria Roda Desarta in a minute to introduce stage 2. We will then have the transnational summary report, and then each of the case study reports will have 5 minutes to tell you what they've found. There will be a short opportunity for questions and closing at the end. So I'll pass it to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. I will present an overview of the work that we have been conducting to develop this report, which focuses on how anti-gender politics affect feminist and LGBTIQ communities across the 9 European case studies. These case studies span from Belarus to people living in exile in Europe, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Poland, Spain, and Switzerland. Anti-gender politics are not new, but their visibility and impact have grown significantly in recent years. And this report examines both the direct effects of these movements in people's everyday lives and also how those affected actively resist and respond to the challenges posed by them. Our research is based on qualitative methods, and from February to May 2024, we conducted 104 interviews and 36 focus groups, engaging with a total of 254 participants across the 9 case studies. Another tool that we used in our research was the relief maps, which allowed participants to visualize their emotional and spatial experiences in relation to anti-gender politics. These participants included activists, academics, public intellectuals, and the general public. And the focus groups and interviews across all the 9 case studies used a shared list of topics to explore and understand participants' lived experiences of the impact of anti-gender discourses, tactics, and actions in various social spaces such as family, home, sexual and affective relations, also friendship, work, and public space, as well as the impact of anti-gender politics, discourses, and actions on various aspects of the everyday life. We took great care in ensuring that ethical standards were strictly followed throughout our research, and all participants gave informed consent and were assured that their personal information would be protected. We are incredibly grateful for their participation, openness, and trust in sharing their stories, which made this work possible. And finally, it's also important to note that through this research, we aim not only to shed light on the harmful impacts of anti-gender politics, but also to celebrate the resilience of those who continue to resist and to build supportive communities in response. And now Marianne Bridon will present the transnational results, and then we will proceed with the specific case studies.
Thank you very much, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to present you the transnational report. The risk of anti-gender movements across Europe pose a systemic threat on feminist and LGBTQ+ people and communities. These movements are not exclusive to Eastern European countries. The violence and discrimination faced by LGBT community and feminists are widespread across all the case studies. Importantly, this is not simply a political phenomenon linked to far-right party, but one that involves a variety of actors, including mainstream political figures, media outlets, religious institutions, and sometimes even within feminist and LGBTQ+ movements themselves. The attack takes many forms, ranging from verbal abuse to physical violence, property destruction, and vandalism of spaces used by feminist and LGBTQ+ activists. In all the case study, there are accounts of public events being disrupted and safe space violated, whether through online harassment and direct threats. Secondly, the social, economic, and psychological impacts of this attack are deeply felt across all case studies. Those targeted by anti-feminist and anti-LGBTQ+ discourses, mobilization, and politics face multiple layers of marginalization. Many reports strain relationships, especially with the family members who may hold opposing views, further isolating them socially. Economically, people experience exclusion from the job market, either through direct or indirect discrimination. For example, many academics participants reported job insecurity and being discouraged from researching and teaching certain topics. The financial instability that results from job loss and legal fields added in the street faced by these people. Psychologically, the effects are not less severe. Many participants describe a heightening level of anxiety, fears, and burnout. Living under the constant threat of harassment and violence take a significant toll on mental health and well-being. This is computed by the failure of institutions to provide adequate support. Participants across several case studies, particularly in countries like France, Poland, and Greece, recount the lack of legal resources available to them, leaving them to navigate a hostile environment with little institutional protection. Despite these challenges, it is crucial to emphasize that those targeted by anti-feminist and anti-LGBTQ+ attacks are far from passive. The third key point of this report is the remarkable resilience of these communities who actively resist through a variety of adaptive strategies. These strategies are context-specific, but they share common themes of solidarity, visibility, and legal advocacy. In many cases, resistance begins with the creation of safer spaces, both physical and digital, where communities members can gather and support one another. For some, this includes organizing protests and public demonstrations, while for others, resistance takes the form of legal action to challenge discriminatory laws and policies. Visibility, despite the inherent risks, remains a crucial tool for encountering anti-gender rhetorics. By asserting their presence in public spaces and online, feminist and LGBTQ+ communities reclaim agency in the face of attempts to silence them. Moreover, building alliances, whether through formal organization or informal support networks, has proven essential for sustaining this resistance effort. In some cases, participants describe forming bubbles or choosing families as a means of creating emotional and physical security. To conclude, the transnational report reveals the extensive range of anti-feminist and anti-LGBTQ+ movement across all Europe, and their disadvantaging effect on the lives of those targeted. However, it is also highlights the resistance of feminist and LGBTQ+ communities. The multi-phase strategies combining solidarity, legal action, and activism demonstrate that resistance is not only possible, but essential in the ongoing struggle. I let my colleague Katia to present you the case of Belarus.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ekaterina Filip, and I'll be sharing insights from our Belarus case study today. Well, first of all, one of the first striking findings that emerged from the discussions, focus group discussions and individual interviews, that it became clear that most participants associate anti-gender politics in Belarus primarily with the state or state repression. The topic was largely framed within the broader context of human rights violations and the absence of the rule of law. As one participant nicely put it, in a state where even the basic human rights are violated daily with ease, anti-gender politics is part of the same machinery. Regarding LGBTIQ+ rights and freedoms, many participants pointed out that the state frequently proposes, debates, or passes almost on a daily basis different discriminatory laws, and therefore positions itself as the main driver of anti-gender politics. At the same time, with the state being the dominant driver of anti-gender hostilities, activists shared their frustration about the difficulty to effect any change on the state level. Another striking finding that emerged from our discussions was the pervasive fear of arrest, fear of reporting the abuse. Following the 2020 elections, many activists feared being arrested or sentenced. Women in the LGBTIQ+ community have been vocal in political protests following the elections, but also in anti-war demonstrations related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this has created widespread fear of potential repercussions. Many participants described an escalating sense of fear, especially as more women and more LGBTIQ+ individuals faced criminal charges and imprisonment. And this has prompted many activists to flee the country. Most participants said that this fear has intensified recently with the impending laws penalizing the promotion of abnormal relationships, such as the discussed anti-LGBTIQ+ propaganda law, similar to one that exists in Russia. And there is a strong concern that such legislation will further silence dissent, intensify repression, and in a way give green light to increased societal hostility. The growing anticipation of violence, and combined with a lack of confidence in the effectiveness of reporting abuse or seeking justice, has contributed to a profound sense of powerlessness. Participants highlighted that the fear of reporting abuse is particularly pronounced among LGBTIQ+ individuals, but also women with children, because there is a women with children fear and that their children might be taken away by authorities. And LGBTIQ+ individuals expressed fear of futility of seeking police assistance, because often referring to police would result even in more harms in the hands of authorities themselves. Another point is that extreme anonymity was discussed as a resistance and a survival mechanism. However, isolation was discussed as a result of hostilities. Participants reported that queer individuals in Belarus currently feel physically isolated and disconnected in their experiences, as it is no longer safe to join support groups or communities within the country. The isolation has made it nearly impossible for people to care for one another. I must say that the possibility of organizing physical gatherings for queer people in Belarus remains unclear to me, even after focus groups and interviews, and for understandable reasons. I mean, there is a strong security concern for not sharing this kind of information. But for those who managed to organize events around 2020, they shared that these gatherings required carefully balancing high security measures against the risks, By 2021, the events locations had to be kept secret and security was significantly heightened. Anti-gender campaigners, both state and non-state actors, created fake profiles to bypass security checks and uncover event locations. And participants shared, particularly community leaders, shared how they had to remain constantly vigilant to ensure the safety of those events. Of course, this continuous tension, fear of surveillance, fear of potential threats have become deeply, deeply exhausting for people. And the last point that I would like to make is in relation to migration. Most of the participants of our study have left Belarus at some point after the protests of 2020, either due to the experiences of already having experienced arrest or the fear of it, and directly linked to their activism. People described migration not just as an escape, but as a necessary response to gender hostilities and also a means of survival. Leaving the country at the same time was a difficult choice for many, as it involved separating from their families and enduring ongoing worry for their loved ones' safety. However, it was also essential and it was a form of resistance. Participants noted that migration opened up new possibilities, such as, for many, the ability to live up their sexuality or gender identity for the first time openly in the new country, also to be able to file legal complaints, particularly in countries like Poland and Western Europe. At the same time, lack of citizenship, lack of financial cushion, loss of pre-existing social networks have contributed to further challenges in the new countries. And for Belarusian participants, often the stereotypes of being associated to Russia, which is perceived by many Western Europeans as an aggressor country, has been a further factor contributing to their marginalization within the countries of migration. So these are the main points related to Belarus case study, and I pass further to the Exile case. Thank you very much.
I will present you the case study of exiled people because our colleague can be here today. This case study explores the experiences of exiled individuals from Turkey and northern Kurdistan who, due to anti-gender politics, are now living in Europe. Through interviews and focus group with 24 participants, we aim to understand how exiled academics, activists, and public intellectuals residing in Germany, Switzerland, France, the Netherlands, and Spain navigate daily life in exile while continuing their advocacy and resistance. To give context, Turkey has a long-standing history of LGBTQI+ oppression, which has intensified in recent years. Key events like the Gezi protest in 2020 and the 2015 election and the 2016 coup attempt led to increased governmental repression against LGBTQ+ and Kurdish communities. Under the ruling AKP's vision of a new Turkey, nationalist and Islamic ideology have led to more authoritarian policies, including withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention, which many saw as an attack of gender equality. Participants described this hostile environment with campaign vilifying LGBTQ+ individuals, resulting in harassment, abuse, and death threats. As outspoken scholar, activist, and public intellectual, many of these exile align with leftist pro-Kurdish movements, which subject them to multiple layers of discrimination. For some, exile is not just a means of escape, but a continuation of their political resistance. However, from dangerous journeys to challenging conditions in refugees camps, living in Europe is far from simple. Many exiles face perilous routes to Europe, including pushback, violence, and even sexual assault at border crossing. Once in Europe, LGBTQ+ refugees, especially trans women, often encounter further discrimination in refugee centers, where they are subject to invasive research and forced placement based on birth assignment gender, creating ongoing vulnerability. Outside the camps, while anti-gender violence may seem less visible, racism and xenophobia are prevalent. Trans activist Lila, for instance, describes feeling less transphobia than in Turkey, but more discrimination based on her immigrant status, raising questions about whether Europe offers generous refugees or merely a different form of marginalization. Participants also report bureaucratic obstacles in host countries, such as difficulty in accessing healthcare, financial aid, and asylum processes, which often leave them feeling rejected. Many avoid official institutions, worrying further discrimination, which limited their access to essential support and pushed them toward informal networks. However, Exile's experience as loss of professional and social status, often finding that their qualifications and past work are devalued. This shift affects their identity and capacity to continue contributing in their fields. In response of this challenge, Exiles turned to activism using social media and other digital tools to maintain solidarity network across borders. However, mainstream LGBTQ+ activist space in Europe, often dominated by cis, white, middle-class perspective, rarely represent the complex identities of queer, racialized, and immigrant individuals. Many participants have created their own network to better reflect their unique experiences, enabling them to resist and confront oppression even in exile. In conclusion, building connection across borders is vital to support exiled LGBTQ+ individual and Kurdish activists, ensuring their voices remain strong and visible. LGBTQ+ movement in host countries must evolve to meet the need of racialized and displaced individuals, making support system accessible and responsive. And I will present you the French case studies. It's important to remember the French context. France has a complex socio-political landscape shaped by Catholicism, colonialism, and secularism, which influences anti-gender discourses, mobilization, and politics. Beyond the far right, conservative and also left movements have reconfigured and exert significant influence in recent years, contributing to the risk of attack on gender studies and progressive gender and sexuality policies. Movements like La Manif pour tous and Le Printemps républicain reflect these tensions. Research shows that feminist and LGBT+ people and community across France face a range of attacks, from verbal harassment to symbolic action and political rhetoric that challenge their rights and recognition in public discourse. Over two-thirds of participants reported being verbally abused in public at protests and also online because of their feminist or LGBTQ+ affiliation and involvements. The repertoire of violence reported by participants is notably wide and appears to be perpetrated by both isolated individuals and coordinated groups. These assaults seem to form part of a continuum of violence that include attack on both property and people, which under French law are classified as infraction, offense, or crime. Participants often reported experience of verbal harassment and physical violence. French participants from multiple marginalized groups highlight the challenge of navigating intersectional oppression, including racism, homophobia, and sexism. As one of the participants explores the intersectional between racism and homophobia, indicating that the effect of racism seems particularly profound and detrimental in his daily life. He also pointed to the complexity of negotiating one identity in environments where multiple forms of oppression intersect. He told us there isn't a me that is the racialized one and a me who is the queer me. This testimony underscores the compound discrimination felt by those at the cross of different identities. The personal and professional repercussions are substantial, and that one participant shared her traumatic experience. She said, "I went through a fortnight of hell, threatened with death. It went very far." This vividly highlights the extreme emotional and psychological strain faced by feminist and LGBTQ+ people, affecting their well-being and daily lives. Many participants described similar experiences of mental distress, career difficulties, and social rejection as a direct result of anti-gender attacks. Despite this challenge, participants highlight the critical role of collective mobilization in their resistance. Solidarity, mutual support, and community initiatives are essential for survival in face of systemic attacks. As Wanda, a sex worker, emphasizes, we support each other. That's my way of protecting ourselves. Such examples of grassroots support and advocacy highlight the resistance of feminist and LGBTQ+ communities in France, demonstrating that despite widespread attacks, these people and collectives are far from being passive. To conclude, the findings from this case study underline the pervasiveness of anti-gender attack across France, affecting all aspects of life for feminist and LGBTQ+ people. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a larger continuum of systemic violence and discrimination. Collective mobilization and solidarity, as shown in providing both emotional and practical support, are a crucial tool for resistance. And I let Steph present the case of Germany.
Thank you very much, Marianne. So I'm presenting the German case study data, and the participants of the German case study characterized German policies as paradoxical. There have been progressive advances, such as the Self-Determination Act, which was passed this year, and which makes it easier to change one's legal gender and name. And in 2018, the civil status law was amended to include a legal third gender, the so-called diverse option. And in 2017, marriage equality was introduced. Now, at the same time, abortion remains a site of political struggle for feminist movements, as it is regulated in the Penal Code. And also this year, and at state level, multiple states introduced bans on gender-inclusive language for the public administration, including schools. And just last week, a local government banned rainbow flags in a public square. For the German case study, we interviewed 24 research participants from across the country, And we have interviewed politicians, authors, academics, diversity professionals, activists, counselors, and educators working in political education. And the nature of attacks that they experienced ranged from online bullying and shitstorms to threats, media campaigns, litigation, disruption of events, as well as physical violence against them or the premises of their organizations. And a notable finding from the German sample was that our participants felt that they largely had to rely on private resources to mitigate the effects of the attacks. And this included relying exclusively on their personal networks for emotional support and on personal financial resources to pay for security measures in their homes or legal fees, even when the attacks occurred as part of their professional roles. And many participants reported none to very little institutional support or safety measures from their funders or employers. And particularly universities were characterized as being slow in their response or as not responding at all. And gender studies scholars reported concerted attacks on themselves or their work. And they also said that their universities mostly lacked processes and support for academics who become targeted. So many of the interviewed researchers recounted a retreat from science communication due to previously experienced attacks and fear of future attacks. However, this retreat from public debates was not only mentioned by researchers. Various participants described how they withdrew themselves from public platforms and debates as a result of these attacks. And through this withdrawal, participants felt they could avert future attacks. But at the same time, they felt that the experience of attacks had a silencing effect on them, and they were pushed out of the public sphere through these attacks. And this is a quote that exemplifies this. And the person we interviewed said, "I try to get as little out there as possible regarding publications or similar. I'm thinking about whether I do it anonymously or not. I silence myself. That's an effect." And the participants saw retreat as a necessity to conserve their mental well-being, but also as a form of defeat. Now, various participants spoke about the relief of retreating to their communities or bubbles, where their identities, experiences, and values are not up for discussion and where they do not face erasure. And they also mentioned being able to engage with others who are affected by the same forms of violence as important and as a source of solidarity and as a basis for coalition politics. And the full German case study report is available both in English and German from the website of the project. And I'll pass on to my colleague, Dr. Anna Karastatis.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Karastatis. My pronouns are she, her. We conducted the case study on Greece with my colleagues, Dr. Ekati Diakoumaki and Dr. Mirtotsi Libounidi at the Feminist Autonomous Center for Research. We spoke with 27 participants in 12 semi-structured interviews and 4 focus groups. In Greece, we found that virtually all participants in the research, so nearly all 27 people, had experienced anti-gender attacks. Online attacks and hate messages via social media about one's identity or political views were virtually universal in the participants' experiences, but some also had experienced attacks that were organized and indeed involved political actors, including members of parliament and government ministers. One participant, Georgia, a visual artist whose work draws attention to femicides and intimate partner violence, shared how her work, which was to be exhibited at the General Consulate of Greece in New York, was censored by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the New Democracy Party. He instructed the consulate to remove her piece entitled Flag, which was a pink and white rendering of the national flag of Greece, which the artist had constructed from donated bed sheets and quilts. Another member of parliament and head of the far-right fundamentalist Greek Orthodox political party, Victory, brought an image of her work into the parliament and denounced it in a parliamentary session. So on the slide, you'll see a quotation from Georgia, which I'll now read. He brought a copy of my piece, Flag, to the Greek parliament, and he said, quote, "The flag is being ridiculed because it's been painted pink," end quote, and that the only time when the flag is allowed to be painted red is when it's, quote, "stained by the blood of the male heroes of the nation," end quote. Georgia continues, "So the Minister of Foreign Affairs asked for my piece to come down. I ended up having to go and take down my work 4 days after the opening, and actually the flag piece was already taken out without me, taken down without my presence, and I received it folded inside a trash bag." Another person who is anonymous in the research was targeted due to his research field and his gender and sexual identities, which were constructed as, quote, "deviant" by the attackers. His photos were circulated on the web, verbal attacks by far-right and alt-right actors, including an MP of the governing New Democracy Party. What ensued were demands for the participant's dismissal from his precarious academic position and legal prosecution. Hundreds of hate messages and death threats were sent to him, which all expressed a violent desire to eliminate him, in his words. Still another anonymous participant described the violent hate speech targeting her in a, quote, "smear campaign on social media," which accused her of being, quote, "a Turkish agent for Erdogan," end quote, and threatened sexual assault, poisoning her dogs, and burning down her house. Quote, "It was horrible," she said. "I have been psychologically damaged by it." The participant left Greece on the advice of authorities and couldn't return to her home for 6 months. Some participants had to leave the country after experiencing an organized anti-gender attack. At the same time, people seek asylum in Greece on the basis of persecution for sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sexual characteristics. SOGI, SC grounds, as they are often abbreviated. They have fled extreme homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic violence in their countries of origin. But rather than reach safety, migration and border politics in Greece and the EU expose them to continued endangerment as LGBTQI people in situations of forced encampment whilst awaiting asylum decisions. As one participant who's forced to live in a so-called closed controlled access center told us, quote, "I'm always afraid one day the Greeks are going to deport everyone. That's what I'm afraid of because I don't have all the papers yet. I've been waiting 12 months to do the asylum interview," end quote. Homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, and racist attacks must be contextualized in the atmospheric violence that suffuses this intensely heteropatriarchal bordered society, targeting LGBTQI people, cisgender heterosexual women, migrants, and racialized people, where these are obviously overlapping categories. During the research, a homophobic, transphobic assault in Thessaloniki took place on March 9th, 2024, during which as many 300 young men chased and physically assaulted two non-binary young people. However, Violence is not totalizing. And as one participant said, quote, "It's not enough to put a stop to the desire for life and the desire, you know, to devour all this amazing spectrum of experience, all the chaos of pleasure brought by queer life," end quote. The participants in the research we want to emphasize are not, nor do they wish to be seen as passive victims of these conditions. Rather, they emphasized how in the daily they engage in resistances from their different positionalities. I'll end with the words of one person who, when we asked them to describe those resistances, responded, "How do I resist? By existing." And I pass to Kath to present the findings on Ireland.
Thank you, Anna, and to all the team. These are difficult findings, I know, to listen to, so thank you all for being here. So I'm Kath Brown. I use the pronoun she, her, and I'm going to talk about the Irish case study. So in Ireland, we found an increase in attacks and targeting of LGBTQIA+ people following the referendums of 2015 and 2018. And in these referendums, we saw 2/3 of the population voting for same-sex marriage and for access to abortion. Participants in Ireland identified an increase in organised attacks that were anti-trans and anti-LGBTQIA+. Since the time of the referendum, people told us that there were various anti-LGBTQIA+ protests targeting of organisations and groups that support those who are most vulnerable. This was seen as creating a context where people are more emboldened to make anti-trans specifically and anti-LGBTQIA+ more broadly statements, and to attend protests that call for the end of, for example, LGBTQIA+ books in libraries. The attacks have increased in number and in how often they happen. Whereas once people said that they were infrequent and sporadic, they are now considered as happening in waves, with a deep sense of fear between each attack about where the next attack is coming from and what will happen. The attacks have also increased in personalisation, targeting not only communities such as trans or LGBTQIA+ communities in general, now they're trained in on specific organisations and particular individuals. The levels of attacks are not understood to be on the same scale as those in the UK or USA or even in Eastern Europe. Yet participants are worried about the complacency of locating gender-critical mobilisations as something that's over there, not in Ireland, and seeing Ireland as exceptional in terms of the mobilisations around the far right and anti-immigration. Participants also said that they thought there was more to come, that this was the start, that Ireland was ripe for further developments in these areas, and had created the groundwork to develop these attacks. Whilst this was initially met with some surprise from some participants, they didn't think that the opposition or those who had voted no had gone away. They had, however, believed somewhat in a changed Ireland, and that, as Moninia said, those days were over. For those who believed that they had fought the battles of 2015 and 2018, there was a feeling that, as Sean said, marriage equality in Ireland for many of us represented a new Ireland. There was a lot of excitement in the sense of the new world. I'm far less hopeful now. There has been moves to suddenly cast the trans community as being highly problematic. We thought that battle had been won, but I don't know if those battles can ever be won. And those who had lived through these experiences saw continuities between then and now, such that patriarchy, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, in Catherine's terms, have always been there. Conversely, the personalisation of Ireland was seen as allowing for resistance. People felt that they could speak to friends and families in ways that made broader differences, and having the chats in their terms was key. And this was about dialogue, sharing personal stories, and humanising people. These were learnings that people had from the referendums, where humanising same-sex couples and LGBTQIA+ people was key to the victories that were won. Now people see informing friends and families of the people behind the stories and controversies and discussions that they're seeing on Facebook and controversies in the media. They see having the chats as a key way of challenging this. Thank you. And I will now pass to Poland.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us so far. So Poland, well, Poland has suffered from the anti-gender mobilizations in politics, media, and civil society for a long while now, and it is clearly reflected in our findings from the everyday life experiences. There are, however, some new and encouraging findings as well. So the main observation is that the anti-gender mobilizations and discriminations are systematic, institutional, persistent, and prolonged. Transphobia, anti-feminism, homophobia, and xenophobia have led to manifold effects among people who care about queer feminist causes and equalities. These effects are exhaustion, burnouts, apathy, and poor mental health. In consequence, these negative states lead to withdrawal from activism, getting off social media, and unfortunately, also various forms of self-censorship. There is also a growing concern about the rising transphobia among some feminist circles in Poland. Another important aspect of the anti-gender politics in Poland relates to their claims on what is science, who and how can create knowledge, what is and what is not a legitimate object of research and academic practice. In other words, there is a clear attack on academic freedoms. From our participants, we have heard about common practices of interfering with the autonomy of the universities, political appointments being made, defunding, and threats to cut funding as another not uncommon practice. And finally, EDI, that is equality, diversity, and inclusion policies that exist or are being developed are only facade documents and regulations that are not treated seriously. However, as I said, there are ricochet effects that go against the grain of the anti-gender initiatives and bring the opposite effect to what the anti-gender movements may wish to achieve. So, we have observed that there is a lot of hope and optimism among queer feminist communities in Poland and among people who care about gender and sexuality-based equalities. Some of these ricochet effects are greater social mobilization for the queer feminist causes among various social groups across all of the society. Also, clearly, social attitudes of the general population show greater acceptance and support for minoritized groups. Among the communities, we have found ongoing remobilizations for activism and collaboration practices. And finally, solidarity is really important with a strong ethos of community support and mutual care. So overall, despite the at least a decade-long or even longer anti-gender mobilizations and initiatives in Poland, and despite the heartbreaking negative effects, there is also a strong drive of solidarity, resilience, and mutual care among most affected communities that we have observed. And this is, I think, one of the most important findings in Poland, which is oftentimes presented as an example of the doom and gloom. And there is a disproportionate attention given to the negatives without acknowledging those what I call here ricochet effects. So thank you, and I'll pass now to Maria.
Thank you, Roberto. So our report conducted by Leon Frede and myself focuses on Spain, particularly in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Despite the significant progress made in feminist and LGBTI rights, there has been a noticeable resurgence of movements opposing these advances. These anti-gender movements are not limited to anti-feminist and anti-LGBT views, but also reflect anti-immigration stances and a strong connection to Spanish nationalism. The study involved 33 participants whose experiences revealed the profound effects of anti-gender politics in both public and private spheres. Although the term anti-gender itself was not widely used by participants, they consistently reported instances of discrimination and violence related to this phenomenon, which was clearly identified as political violence, as a deliberate and organized effort to intimidate and control. Participants characterized anti-gender violence as an old discourse resurfacing in new and more aggressive forms, and their testimonies reveal that these attacks are not random acts of violence, but rather tactics of intimidation aimed at silencing feminist and LGBT voices. Many shared stories of online harassment, physical threats, and even assaults. And these experiences suggest that this anti-gender violence is not only a personal attack, but also part of a broader political strategy to foster an atmosphere of fear. Online violence specifically was significant in our findings. Participants recounted being subjected to insults, threats, and even doxing. This digital aggression was often mirrored in physical spaces with feminist institutions, homes, and also workplaces becoming specific targets for verbal abuse and physical threats. In these cases, participants spoke of a pervasive sense of surveillance and intimidation designed to undermine their activism and personal security. The constant exposure to anti-gender violence has led to significant changes in behavior. For example, many participants shared that they had modified their daily routines, avoided certain spaces, and moderated their public discourse to protect themselves from further attacks. And the burden of managing these threats daily took also an emotional toll, contributing to a growing sense of exhaustion and also fear. In response, affected individuals and communities have developed various coping mechanisms, self-defense, the formation of solidarity networks, and the creation of bubbles of safe spaces free from anti-gender violence have emerged as a critical strategy. These bubbles, for example, offer a relief from the daily threats and help sustain the well-being of those under attack. And finally, organized resistance has also become an essential response to anti-gender violence. From grassroots efforts to global campaigns, feminist and LGBT communities are fighting back by boycotting targeted campaigns, employing digital security measures, and also fostering dialogue to counteract anti-gender actors. Finally, these forms of resistance represent also a crucial effort to protect the gains of feminist and LGBT movements in an increasingly hostile environment. And now to Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Maria. And we will conclude our session today with the presentation of the findings of Switzerland, where we were able to interview 31 persons as well. We had 31 participants in total for focus groups and interviews. I'll present some of the findings which stood out, particularly in the Swiss case studies. And one of the first things that struck us was that most participants in the Swiss case study identified the media and politics as the primary arenas for anti-gender mobilizations, although, of course, other groups such as religious organizations, masculinist groups, right-wing extremists, and TERFs were mentioned as key actors. But throughout the interviews and focus group discussions, misinformation emerged as the major driver of hostility in Switzerland. Many participants highlighted how media and political narratives, particularly those sexualizing sex education and transgender rights, have played crucial roles in spreading fear and hostility. These narratives, participants believe, influence individuals who were previously possibly neutral or uninformed. One participant illustrated this by saying, "I always notice when I haven't spoken to my mother about LGBTIQ plus or trans issues for about 6 months or so, how much the newspaper narratives have affected her." Several participants also noted that while in 2021, when the marriage equality campaign was ongoing, it sparked hostile discourses, then current hostility is expressed without any extensive debate going on. And also it has shifted from far right center to from far right to the center, and has become more socially accepted and often presented under the guise of the concern for the young people. And the recent political campaign by the right-wing Swiss political party highlighted the political significance of this movement. This was voiced by many participants. Another finding that was particularly striking in the Swiss case is that most participants, first of all, expressed that the hostility has been on the rise in the recent years, and it manifested itself in growing fears and anticipation of physical violence. Violent attacks by right-wing extremist groups at feminist and queer events, along with the hostile rhetoric of masculinist and incel movements in social media, were seen as contributing to a broader climate of hostility towards equality issues. And this has led to an increased fear and pressure among individuals targeted by anti-gender movements. One participant shared the experience, stating, and I quote what is written on the slide, "At events where I had no fear at all in Switzerland, queer events, that I had no fear that something could happen, I now go with an uncomfortable feeling. For example, at a drag story time. A few years ago, I had never had the feeling that something would happen when I went to a queer event." So the discussions highlighted a rise in hate comments and security threats during events such as pride parades, leading to heightened police presence and a need to have emergency protocols for queer events. Despite knowing growing concerns, one participant, who is a cis lesbian woman, she said that she felt less targeted than trans and non-binary people. The anticipation of physical and verbal violence among trans participants was expressed particularly acutely. As one trans participant said, "It is as if we are collectively going through this together. Personally, I don't experience it very badly, but it weighs on me to know that at any moment I can experience it." And other trans participants in our groups have confirmed that this heightened feeling of fear and anticipation of violence. Another finding that was particularly striking in Switzerland had to do with online hate and targeting. Most participants reported experiencing online hate and targeting, highlighting the significant role masculinist groups play in spreading hostile rhetoric, but often this rhetoric, they noted, circulates transnationally. Direct attacks on individuals and organizations are commonplace, with many participants reporting that regular hate emails and other threats are sent to their personal and professional accounts. Most of these attacks participants observed are transphobic and misogynistic, noting that much of the hostile rhetoric seems to be recycled from media and social media coverage in other countries, in the United States, UK, and other contexts. Participants shared their personal stories to highlight the intensity of such online hostility. For example, one participant, Amy, who engages on feminist issues with various age groups, she was shocked by the regressive views young women are hearing from their male peers, something like women should stay in the kitchen. Many participants also pointed to the rise of ultra-masculinist discourse on social media, describing it as a bubble that fosters radicalization. In addition to receiving threatening and discriminatory content, participants noticed the specific trolling tactics used to drain activists' energy and time. The constant barrage of online hostility has created a pervasive fear that this violence may spill over into the offline world. adding to the stress and fatigue that comes from ongoing exposure to hostile content. As a result, some participants have begun to withdraw from personal and professional online spaces to protect their mental health. And these are some of the findings that I wanted to highlight for Switzerland, and I believe this was the last case study, and we open up the floor for questions.
Thanks, Kasia. Yes, there's been a few questions in the Q&A, so I'll just take a few of them and then I'll pass to my colleagues. Just to note that in terms of anti-gender mobilisations, there's a couple of questions in here more broadly. That was what we did in Work Package 1, and we have a report on what is happening across Europe in the mobilisations itself. But our focus today is actually on people's experiences and the effects of these mobilisations on their lives, on their work, and hopefully you have a good sense of the intense and extensive effects that these mobilisations are having. Yeah, so that answers that one, sorry. And yeah, just to note, we will have this recording up on our website. And if you are interested in the findings, please do click on our website where you can download them. All of the executive summaries for the transnational report and individual case studies are in the languages that we have presented, that the case studies are in. I'll just pass to Roberto, who I might ask Roberto if you could respond to this question. Can you speak more to the finding that was mentioned about how academics are facing job insecurity and pressure not to teach certain subjects? And just to note at the end of that question, we're asked about numbers and percentages. This was a qualitative study, so our focus was on people's stories rather than percentages of people who occupied specific positions. But we can absolutely speak more to that specific finding. Roberto.
Yes, thanks, Kav, and thank you for that question. Yes, exactly. So as Kav said, like it was qualitative, so the numbers, we were not running any large surveys. And also in the transnational report, we have pulled all the methodological information also about our participants and different demographic characteristics that we've managed to receive from them. So you'll be able to see more breakdown in the report there. The question about the threats to academics, job insecurities, and the various different pressures. It is very clear all across our cases, but also, as we know from the existing literature about other countries that are not part of our consortium, that anti-gender movements are very much interested in shaping not only popular opinion, but also shaping the kind of formal structural definitions of not only legal systems, but also of the knowledge systems in various countries. So, for example, in some cases, also in Poland, gender studies as a discipline was removed, or there were different attempts to remove it as a formally recognized scholarly discipline, which therefore translates on, for example, ability or inability of institutions to offer courses and programs that focus on the subject, or would like to offer diplomas in this. Other examples of what people reported to us are various forms of the direct threats of losing jobs, or indeed stories where people lost their jobs because of their activities, or also different informal, implicit threats that they receive from managers. when I say, and by the way, it's also important to recognize that I'm not just talking about people who teach or themselves research a broad area of gender and sexuality studies. We've spoke with people who work all across different sectors and lines within the broader academic and educational systems, not only with researchers, so also people in the administration, people who occupy different positions of related to the equality tasks and duties, etc. Another example. So one of the direct examples that I know from the
Thanks,
Polish.
Roberto. We might move to the next question now, because there's been a few more come in. But thank you for that. And just to note, Roberto is obviously talking extensively and expansively because there is so much research in this area, including in his very excellent Polish report. So Anna, I might turn to you and ask you a question that's quite straightforward. I guess my question is, what is next for you and Resist? And just before you answer that, some people in the chat are keen to make contact with us, to get in touch. You can put it in the chat, but also on our Resist website, there are newsletters. There's a newsletter you can sign up to, as well as an email that you can get in touch with us. And we would be keen, obviously, to make contacts and connections with those of you who are working in similar areas. So please do get in touch. Anna, can I pass to you?
Yes. What's next? So currently we're collaborating, we're in the third phase of the research. We're collaborating with 40 civil society organizations, collectives, networks, organizations, various kinds of groups across Europe to collectively create a strategy for a transnational intersectional feminist network to counter so-called anti-gender politics. And the idea is that this network will be based on the research findings. It will be based on the experiences of these 40 organizations. And it will outlive the research and make the leap from knowledge to praxis. So if you're interested in learning more about this, as Kath just said, don't hesitate to get in touch. Our contacts are on the site. And yeah, we hope to be in touch about this and have more to say about it in about 1.5 years from now.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, you'll notice that Resist, has presented our first findings back in March, and now we're in October with our second set of findings. We're taking a slow academic approach to create, very high quality findings. So we will be back with another set of findings. One person in the webinar has asked about the specific information about each country. So at the front of each of the case studies, you will find a page and a half of case study details that are specific to each country, and each case study is written in relation to the specificity of its context. We have a number of geographers on the team who have been interested in doing this. There is a question in here that says, can you say something about the differences in the consequences of anti-gender in liberal versus illiberal states? And the first thing we would say, there is a discourse that geographers have been challenging for some time, including Roberto's excellent work about the idea of a kind of progressive Western Europe versus a backwards Eastern Europe, and using kind of understandings of progression that come only from a very specific context. We found anti-gender effects and experiences that were heartbreaking in every context we looked at. And there wasn't a context where everything was fine. Saying that the consequences were different and they were varied, both across individual participants and across the contexts themselves. I wouldn't want to generalize across all of them, but I think the report shows that this isn't just a problem for some places. It's a problem that we're all facing across Europe. And just to note how the participants were chosen, we used a self-selecting purposeful sample, which means that we asked people if they had any experiences of anti-LGBT, anti-feminist, anti-sex work, and anti-immigration in relation to that. We looked at racism as well. How they had experienced, or if they had experienced these effects, to come and speak to us. So we were specifically targeting those who felt that they had experiences that were relevant to the research. And in the next in the next report that we'll release, we'll look at how we might upscale that into looking at quantitative work around how prevalent this is in different contexts and different regions. We have not looked at funding. There's lots out there on funding, but that wasn't our focus. Our focus was on everyday lives, on people themselves, on their experiences at home, at work, and in different places of the effects of these mobilizations and politics. And I think, unless any of my colleagues have anything to say, we will close it there. So just to thank everybody who was involved in the research, everyone who shared their heartbreaking stories and their powerful acts of resistance in challenging what they are experiencing. Thanks to all my colleagues who have worked tirelessly to create these reports. We hope that those of you in this room will use them to make positive social change, to make people's lives better, and to counter the mobilizations and rhetorics that are so damaging across Europe. Thank you very much.